We climbed the mountainside to the summits far above. Oh, I shall never forget, for that view I sure did love. For a mile down in the valley, with their heads held mighty high, stood three monarchs of the north with their noses to the western sky. They headed for Big Timber with an enormous stride. Oh, how I wished to be there by that largest monarch's side. But no one got any shooting on our first day out, but the second was much better without the slightest doubt. For Doc shot at a bull in the morning about 10, and I dropped two nice deer just about 4 p.m. The third day was quiet, but most of us saw game, so far out of our reach we didn't try our aim. Perrine, the guide, and myself slept in a tent that night, so we could be on the job with the earliest dawn of light. When the sun rose over the mountain, we were far out on our trail. Both of us had a feeling a bull moose we would nail. I was slept in a tent that night, so we could be on the job with the earliest dawn of light. When the sun rose over the mountain, we were far out on our trail. Both of us had a feeling a bull moose we would nail. I was playing the game alone as the guide was with Perrine, and while sneaking through a slashing, my great bull moose I seen. He was running over the windfalls, possibly 40 rods away, making an awful crashing noise, my friends, I'm here to say. I jumped up on a stump, and my heart swelled with pride as I watched this mighty monarch through that awful slashing glide. His head he held quite high with his antlers over his shoulders, and headed for the rim rock to glide over the big boulders. I raised my .35 Remington, and the lead I sure let fly, for I was after this trophy, and I had a real good eye. It took a lot of lead to bring this monarch down, and when I got to him, 9 bullets in him I found. He was a noble beast with a beautiful spread, and a vision came to me of a pretty mounted head. Hanging in my parlor where my wife, when 2 shots a mile away, announced another bull was down, for the Perrine had fell a prey. And the next day Dr. Maltman wounded a big bull, and after tracking it for miles, for home he did pull. Jim had the same luck the following day, for he wounded a big bull which also got away. A nice deer came near camp to try out his luck, and one shot Doc so soon had him hanging up. Jim started out that morning with Pete the Indian guide, determined not to come back without a moose's hide. He had good luck too, for he got a 4-point deer and a most wonderful bull, and came home full of cheer. The next morning when the sun came, it found Pete and Fred a mile away, as they were out to pack in Jim's moose he had killed the previous day. But while taking an old tote road a mile north of our camp, a big bull on the mountainside, these two guides had lamp. So back Pete came and told Dr. Maltman of the bull Fred and he had seen, and Doc took the Luger, but it didn't drop to stay, for it rushed off through the timber and finally got away. The weather was so awful mild that we lost a lot of meat due to its spoiling caused from the unusual heat. October the 27th was so awful warm that Dr. Maltman and Brother Jim pulled off the hunting garb and in the pigeon they did swim. 2 great big timber wolves said, "How do you do?" one day to my friend Dr. Maltman, then rambled on their way. Brother Jim and myself watched the beaver family work, for they are busy little fellows, and their duty never shirked. We saw lots of partridge and shot quite a few, and traveled up and down the river in a little moose-hide canoe. We partied around the rapids and canoed to Partridge Falls. Coming back, shooting the rapid was the most exciting of all. We visited old Fort Charlotte on the Pigeon River bank. In the state of Minnesota, it stands in the oldest rank. It was built in 1732 when the British claimed, but now it is quite different as it belongs to Uncle Sam. The old fort is destroyed and there's not much to view, except a lot of trenches and graves, a very few. At that time, the noble redskin roamed the country through and through and traveled on the pigeon and little birch bark canoe. Well, those days are gone forever. On a reservation they must stick, and to me it always seemed it was a dirty, wicked trick. But such is life in this old world, and the day, too, will soon come when the monarch of the north o'er these mountains will not run. But for a friend, I'm off my story. I'll get back before you scoff, and discontinue this sadness and hold these visions aloft. Dad only hunted partridge, and mountain climbing was too tough, and he has killed lots of game, so he's already done his stuff. Dad enjoyed himself the same as all the rest, and when he played at horseshoe, he always did his best. One day, Quilly Porcupine made us a friendly call, but after I took his picture, he was afraid he did haul. Perrine was a fine shot, and the day we broke camp, he got a fine. but after I took his picture, he traded it all. Breen was a fine shot, and the day we broke camp, he got a fine doe after a half-mile tramp. Adam was a Polish cook, was certainly some chef, and when we left the table, there was never nothing left, for we couldn't leave the board as long as anything was there. His cooking created an appetite much worse than any bear's. The guides had eyes like hawks, both of them, Fred and Pete, and when it came to seeing game, they simply couldn't be beat. It was a jolly crowd, and all were full of fun. The weather was ideal, and the grub was number one. Now you've got it all, my friends. I've nothing more to say, but this hunt I will remember for many and many a day. One reading my life story would think I did nothing but hunt. But to the contrary, the actual time I put in hunting was insignificant, but they were great relief from the cares of life, which everyone had them and taught them to use the gun and the proper way to handle them. Also, they accompanied me on many hunts and fishing trips, and I was present when each of my sons killed their first deer. Later on, you will read of many of the vacations we all had together and how they were spent, and all enjoyed. My health grew worse in 1925 after doctoring with home doctors with no apparent relief. I went to the Mayo Clinic at Rochester, Minnesota, and after a thorough examination, Dr. Charles Mayo performed surgery on me, as they found I had an ulcer. They also removed my tonsils for the second time, as they had been removed the year before by our family doctor and had grown back. I spent 5 weeks in Rochester, returning home to recuperate. Everything went along as usual on the farm. I don't recall. Jim again invited me for another moose hunt in Canada, where we had hunted before. Jim, Art Coquille, and Nick Bayless came by train to Duluth, where I met them, and we drove my car and got our supply of the Grand Marais as before. Also hired a cook and 2 Indian guides. This hunt was not so successful, but we all had a very fine vacation. Jim was the unlucky one if he never saw a moose. Art and Nick each bagged a fine bull, and I got one also. None of us saw a deer. They were very scarce for some reason. It didn't seem possible that they could have been hunted out in 2 years' time. Moose, too, had become scarce also, and we've seen but a few signs of them. In fact, all have become scarce also, and we've seen but a few signs of them. In fact, all game signs were lacking. But the joy of hunting party isn't always in the amount of game killed, but it is in the fellowship and association with your friends, and I can truthfully say that you become much closer to one another in an isolated hunting camp. The guide and I trailed a moose through some spruce into a bog. We figured he must be quite near, so I jumped upon a log. Then I saw my 10-point moose standing among some tamaracks. I raised my .35 Remington and took at him 7 cracks. 2 hit his shoulder and 1 his hip, so he went down to rise no more. That's how I sent my second bull to the happy hunting ground shore and took at him 7 cracks. 2 hit his shoulder and 1 his hip, so he went down to rise no more. That's how I sent my second bull to the happy hunting ground shore. I was continually troubled with ulcers, so the following June I was again in Rochester, and Charles Mayo again operated on me. Though I improved some, I was told by the doctor my hard working days were over. So on July the 23rd, 1928, we had an auction sale and sold all our farm equipment, stock and household goods, and bought a new Essex auto and headed for Columbia, Mississippi, where Brother Jim offered me the privilege to buy 1/5 interest in a veneer mill he owned at Foxwoods, Mississippi, 3 miles from Columbia. I knew I wouldn't be able to do much for some time, so we knew I wouldn't be able to do much for some time, so we took our time going south and visited along lots of friends on our way. The night of our sale, we stayed on the farm to look after articles bought that the buyers would not be able to take that day. That night, as my family well remember, there were more than 80 friends dropped in on us by surprise for a farewell party. Though there was not a chair to sit on, we all had a fine time and ate a hearty lunch that the friends had brought. The next night, we're at the Henry Coleman home in Ogilvie. There again, we were surprised by a large number of friends. Our next stop was at Aiken, Minnesota, where another party was given us. From there on, we went to Villard, Minnesota, to friends, very close family, another big time, and ice cream and cake. We then drove to Hopkins, Minnesota, to Alda's parents' place, where we spent a few days, and while there, Fred and Jenny Sprungman, old friends from Ogilvie, invited us over to their for an evening in Minneapolis, and to our surprise, their house was full of old friends, and a good time was we had. From Hopkins, we drove to my birthplace, Farmerville, Iowa, arriving there just in time to help celebrate Old Soldiers Reunion I have mentioned before. I met a great many old friends, some I hadn't seen for 20 years. Though Alda and the children had not met them before, they were accepted and old friends, and they had heard about them through letters from Mother. They felt as though they knew them. We spent 4 happy days there, then drove to Waterloo. Old friends, and they had heard about them through letters from Mother. They felt as though they knew them. We spent 4 happy days there, then drove to Waterloo, Iowa, to Alda's Uncle Bert and Aunt Rena's Joyner's place. There the children and I were new to them, but we had a most wonderful time. Now our last stop was at my parents' place in River Forest, Illinois. Mother invited all my old salesman friends from the Messenger Paper Company to spend an evening with us. So I had a glorious evening going over old times, over coffee and cake. While in Chicago, Alda and I went to Sears Roebuck and purchased a new set of household furniture and all supplies for setting up housekeeping. While Alda and the children stayed with my folks, I made a trip by rail to Mississippi to look over what took our time and surely enjoyed every minute of it. When we got settled, Brother Jim came down from Chicago and we had a company meeting. We took the name of Foxwood Veneer Company, and I was elected Secretary-Treasurer, and also was employed as a manager in one part of the mill. My work was not labor, but required a lot of responsibility, and in my poor health, it was very hard for me. There is one thing that I did help me wonderful. It was my hobby. Collecting Indian relics in Marion County, where we lived, had the Pearl River running through it, and in early times it had been heavily populated with Indians, and we found this was a collector's paradise. On many Saturday afternoons and some Sundays, I would load the family in the car, and we would head out of town to search the spearheads and stone drills we would find in 2 or 3 hours. In collecting, we met many plantation owners and their children. When we explained what we were doing, the children would ask if we would buy them if they found them. I told them I'd pay 2 cents each for all that were nicely made. This developed into a real good business, and we developed a real route which we covered about once a month buying these relics. Also, many came to the mill where I worked on Saturday afternoon and bought relics. This Sunday went on until I had many cigar boxes and other containers filled with relics. I decided something had to be done, as the collectors were getting more of my sales than I was, so I had to cut the price to 1 cent each. But they kept coming. I decided then to try and sell them. So I advertised all over the United States, so in this way I was able to continue buying and building my collection. After 3 months in Columbia, we rented a house in Foxworth, so to be close to the mill. We enjoyed our neighbors and were well accepted by them. Of course, to a very few, we were damn Yankees. They hadn't discovered that that was two words. After we were settled in Mississippi, I decided to write a poem to old friends back home, which was published in the old home paper. Farewell, friends, for we are leaving. We're moving to a southern clime, and it fills my heart with sorrow as I write this humble rhyme. Since my health has failed me, the doctors advise I take a rest. And you know, too, my wife's health is not of the very best. Though we shed a tear in parting for our friends we hate to leave, why, too, my wife's health is not of the very best. Though we shed a tear in parting for our friends we hate to leave, why one must go through this sorrow I have not the power to conceive. But such is life in this old world, it happens each and every day, that friends must say a sad goodbye as they part for different ways. We have lived here a long time and have spent many a happy year with our friends and neighbors that we've grown to love so dear. And though we have to say goodbye, we'd much rather say hello, but owing to our ill health, fate has willed that we must go. But, dear friends, we will be with you as we live from day to day, for you will be in our thoughts, though we are many miles away. And down in the sunny south, where we'll make our future home, be sure and come and visit us, if down south you ever roam. It is while I lived in Foxworth that the Lord brought me to my senses. Our son Jimmy was taken low, but owing to our ill health, fate has willed that we must go. But, dear friends, we will be with you as we live from day to day, for you will be in our thoughts, though we are many miles away. And down in the sunny south, where we'll make our future home, be sure and come and visit us, if down south you ever roam. It is while I lived in Foxworth that the Lord brought me to my senses. Our son Jimmy was taken suddenly ill with terrible stomach pains when he was 12 years of age. And doctor called it locked bowels, as he had adhesion caused from the appendix operation. The doctor said go to the hospital at once. We did, and an operation was performed at once, but Jimmy's apparently died on the operating table. After trying for some time, trying to get him to breathing, Dr. Gardner gave up and went to his study crying. After several minutes by the nurses, he showed signs. His life there was hope, but Jimmy had very little chances of living. In fact, he could go any minute. He was brought to his room, and for 11 days and nights, Alda and I was by his bedside. Alda got a little rest as a cot was brought in the room for her. I never laid down, and as strange as it may sound, I never got sleepy. I went home on 2 occasions and took a bath. On the 11th day, I was returning to the hospital, and though I was not a Christian, I was praying an awful lot. I was riding along praying for God to save him when all at once I realized it was wrong, that my prayer was a selfish prayer, and I wasn't considering what might be God's will, and I said, Lord, I take back every word. He is yours, and if you want him, take him. I can't remember in life ever having such a feeling of joy. From there on to the hospital I was whistling, and the Lord used to punish me and bring me to my senses. Like so many people, I had been brought up in a Christian home, but was giving God but little thought. It wasn't long after this that I joined the Masonic Lodge, and their teachings sure helped me, as it was all founded on the Bible. Later on, our whole family accepted Christ and joined the Baptist Church. Later, I was selected assistant superintendent to Sunday school and was elected deacon. So my life was now new, and ever since I have tried to serve my Lord in the best I can. Hazel had graduated from high school and had gone north to live with Alda's parents, as Alda's mother was quite poorly. That winter, December the 10th, 1932, Hazel was married to an old friend of our family, Earl Averill. Alda had known him from when he was a baby. Hazel was married to an old friend of our family, Earl Averill. Alda had known him from when he was a baby. We had a normal life at Foxworth, and nearly every year I took a vacation from work, and with the family we traveled and seen lots of country. Some years returning north to visit our relatives and friends. On our trip to Minnesota in 1932, I purchased a new Chevrolet car. On our way back, we came down through eastern Kansas, and there we visited a cousin of mine, Alec Johnson, who took us to Grandpa Kibbe's old farm where my mother had spent some of her early days. There were no buildings left, but the old spring where they got their water was still flowing strong. It was the head of a creek that flowed by where the house had stood. From there on, we went to see the first school house my mother had attended, and it was in good repair and lived a long time yet. We traveled a little over 1,400 miles home, and at no time did I drive over 25 miles an hour. We had fun and collected some relics. During the 8 years we lived at Foxworth, we made trips to other states to collect relics, most often to Arkansas, where we became acquainted with another collector, Niall Macy and family. On one trip, we spent a week with them and had a wonderful vacation. We dug in Saltpeter Cave, which was a very large natural cave that Indians had occupied for hundreds of years. This was known by the fact that two men had dug down over 25 feet in it to mine saltpeter, and all the way down they found Indian artifacts, Indian campfires, and lots of bones of different animals. We dug considerable, but made no great find. A few bone awls and an arrowhead now and then. We men folks got tired of digging in the ashes and dirt and decided on a swim. There was a nice stream near the foot of the hill where the cave was, so we went to get cooled off. Niall was first in, and before I was undressed, he threw a nice fish out near me. I asked how he caught it, and he said with his hands. I had never heard of this way of fishing. He called it noodling fish. The boys and I got a lot of them by reaching under the large rocks in the stream. I sure was surprised. They were so easy to catch. They didn't move when touched. On these trips, I always took a few thousand bone needles, copper needles, pottery, celts, pipes, and many other kinds of relics. In this way, I built up a regular museum collection. While living in Foxworth, I took our family to Biloxi and Gulfport, Mississippi on the Gulf for a few days outing. On several occasions, I took a load of men fishing for a trip in the Gulf. We always caught lots of fish. One time we caught 24 different kinds of marine life, some very odd fish among them. While I was living in the South, Brother Jim gave some old guns to me, so that started me collecting them. I accumulated 25 in all over the years. I done some quail hunting while living at Foxworth with fair success. I never was a good collecting them. I accumulated 25 in all over the years. I done some quail hunting while living at Foxworth with fair success. I never was too good with a shotgun, and one time took my 3 boys with me on one of these hunts. Old Joe, our bird dog, came to point in some briar bushes along a little draw. I told the boys to get behind me, and if they flew our way, for them to drop down on the ground. Well, 3 quail raised all at once, one to the left and one to the right and one in front. I shot bang, 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 and a shot, and all 3 fell. Jimmy said, "Gee, we're going to get a lot of them, ain't we, Dad?" I was as surprised as the boys. Gee, I don't know was my answer. Well, I did get 7, all told, and felt quite good. Gee, we're going to get a lot of them, ain't we, Dad? I was as surprised as the boys. Gee, I don't know was my answer. Well, I did get 7, all told, and felt quite good. During the winter months, I went several times with friends coon and possum hunting. It was thrilling to hear the dogs when they hit a hot trail. We usually got our share. One night the dogs drove a skunk into a big hollow Tupelo stump. A dog would go in and after it and then come out real quick. I was disgusted with the dog and grabbed a club and took a flashlight and into the stump I crawled, and in no time at all I came out with a skunk. The boys gave me lots of room and said my wife wouldn't let me in the house when I got home. I laughed. These southern skunks were small, and some Al never noticed the smell until I had been in the house several minutes. Listen just a minute, friends, and my story I will start of our coon and possum hunt and how the dogs did bark. There were 7 of us roughnecks in this bruised and battered crowd with 2 blame good dogs to bark and yelp real loud. We went down to Mr. Ball's place south of Foxworth, Mississippi, and whatever those dogs treed, we didn't care a rippy. So we wandered into the swamp, and the dogs picked up a trail, and it wasn't very long before a possum they did nail. This blue baby was up a snag about 12 feet high. One of the boys climbed up and got it and slammed it square dab in my eye. Then the dogs hooked the trail of a pretty ring-tailed coon, and their barking plainly told us that the happy hunting ground he'd go soon. They finally started yelping like they had that coon treed, and the boys with the lights steamed out full speed. The rest horn toads, how I did dance and prance. You may talk about the World War heroes that were dashing over the top, but of all the 2 places, friend, I think this was the toughest spot. Running there in the wild woods after a pair of barking dogs, hooking vines under your beater and falling over rotten logs, and some sucker just ahead would let a limb fly back, and gee willikers, you'd see stars and you'd get a heck of a whack. And you'd just be getting over this awful smart and burn when you step in a pool of water and a mud and water churn. Then you'd flounder out of this to where it was high and dry and run a limb big as a tree slap dab right in your eye. But brace up and march on was all there was to do, for each one had his troubles and no time to pity you. Well, we finally found the dogs, and they had killed the ringtail, and in about 5 minutes they had picked up a new trail. So us poor battered bleeding sinners took a log for a seat and built a little fire to warm our water-soaked feet. But we didn't get much time to rest, for the 2 dogs worked with hoping that another coon they'd treed. So with brave hearts we went through all that misery once again, of briars scratching our hinders and limbs hitting us under the chin, vines wrapping around our neck and running against the trees, of falling over the logs and rolling in the leaves. Well, we stuck to it till daylight and sure got a lot of game. But by heck, for going through this torture, our mugs should be in the Hall of Fame. By now you must know I'm heavy on poetry, such as it is. So at the present time I have written 78 poems and written 3 or 4 short stories. Back in Mississippi I killed 1 alligator while there. They are not plentiful. This brings to mind a story about Brother Jim. He had shot a wild turkey which fell in a swamp a few rods from shore. Jim waded out to get it, and just as he reached for Brother Jim, he had shot a wild turkey which fell in a swamp a few rods from shore. Jim waded out to get it, and just as he reached for it, an alligator grabbed it. Jim swears he came back to shore so fast that when he looked back, he seen the tracks in the water. Now, Paul Bunyan couldn't beat that. I only saw 1 wild turkey in the time I lived down south, and that was one I shot at long range with a shotgun. One shot broke a wing, and I never would have got it if it hadn't had the dog along, which caught it for me. My boys and I killed a great many squirrels down there, and as they were very plentiful. In 1930, we all went to Chicago to help my parents celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. I wrote a poem to them, which I will write as on wedding day, to be with you, Sister Gladys and Letty, and also Brother Jim and Ray. With all the other dear relations whose names are not mentioned in this rhyme, I thank the Lord for this blessed pleasure that we could meet another time. It fills my heart as I write these lines, the tears of joy I cannot withhold, for it's been 29 long, long years since all of us were together over us as rolls. So, Dad and Mother, I sincerely hope we all meet this again in this same way and strengthen our love as we have done on this your golden wedding day. We all were present at my parents' 57th wedding anniversary also and had a real wonderful time. After 8 years at this mill, I was pretty much wrecked from the strain I was under, and so no apparent reason that it would ever be two classes in the South at the time we lived there. There was the higher educated class and the lower element that was commonly called white trash and the poor Negroes. This working class was quite shiftless, with no desire to better themselves. As a foreman, I had to be on the job all the time in order to see that each stayed on the job. For if I left for any length of time, when I returned, I have to hunt some of my help up. I'd find them in different places, generally behind the building smoking or just laying in the shade. You might ask, why didn't I discharge them? Well, who would I have take their place? If I heard they were just like them. Well, after 8 years of this, I had it. So I resigned from my foreman job and quit the mill. Brother Jim wanted me to go to Leakesville, Mississippi, to one of the other mills and run a commissary. Quit the mill. Brother Jim wanted me to go to Leakesville, Mississippi, to one of the other mills and run a commissary. So the family moved to Leakesville, and I built a store building 30 by 60 feet and went into the store business. I had a hired help, but to my sorrow, I got a crook, and in 11 months we lived there. He stole over $1,400. We caught him red-handed with $65 of marked bills of mine in his pocket. The sheriff took him to jail, but in a few minutes he was bailed out. This was when I became a damn Yankee, so nothing was done with him. I was so disgusted, and Ella and I had often talked of moving from the South, as we considered it was a poor place to raise our sons in this environment. So on the 27th day of May, 1937, often talked of moving from the South, as we considered it was a poor place to raise our sons in this environment. So on the 27th day of May 1937, I sold our store to my brother Jim and pulled out of Mississippi. No particular destination in mind, as we were just looking for a new place to settle. We had the idea we would like to go into the tourist business. So we traveled many thousands of miles through the western states looking for tourist court for sale. They were all new and business was good, so none was for sale. We visited my cousin Clifford Kibbe in Colorado on 2 different occasions, and on July the 4th, 1937, we landed in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Again, my mind has shifted back to an experience I had collecting relics in Mississippi. It was one Saturday, and I wanted to be alone. So I took the car and drove a few miles south of Foxworth. I saw a side road leading into the woods on my left and decided to take it. I drove about a half mile and came to a small plowed field. In the summer, the Pearl River just ran by it and came over its banks and had completely washed all the loose soil away. Yet, in doing that, it had moved the stone relics some, but where in the field arrowheads and other small relics slid along until they lodged against a weed or some other object that was solid. I got pretty busy, and it took 4 hours for me to cover that little field real good. On several occasions I stooped and picked up 7 relics. Many times everything in one pile, I sat down and separate out the perfect ones. You see, by now I had become more particular in what I collected. Out of about a peck, I saved 200 and went home about exhausted from bending so much. On our western trip, we were on top of Pikes Peak on the first day of June. We were the first car up as we followed the snowplow. We were there but a short time as the light air was too much for us coming from almost sea level. I nearly passed out 2 or 3 times, so we got back down as fast as I could safely drive. We had our household goods brought from Mississippi by a Continental truck to Minneapolis, and we rented a house from Alda's Uncle Joe Empanger in Hopkins, Minnesota. There the boys went to school for the winter, and in the spring we purchased the Shady Pines, Mississippi by a Continental truck to Minneapolis, and we rented a house from Alda's Uncle Joe Empanger in Hopkins, Minnesota. There the boys went to school for the winter, and in the spring we purchased the Shady Pine Tourist Camp in Little Falls, Minnesota, and that was our home for 14 years. This was to be our new life, and a very interesting one, too. Over the years, it seemed we met every kind of a person that God created, mostly good ones, but as expected, there was some rotten eggs in the basket also. Alda's biggest headache was cleaning up the cottages after women. I'm sorry to have to say this, but it was surprising how many women, when traveling, threw all pride to the wind and left the overnight cottage looking like a hog pen, as near as it could. Alda would find lipstick, rouge, and powder smeared on it would be so filthy that I have heard Alda say many times that she would find a cabin like this. She was sorry she was a woman. Thank the Lord, all women were not like some of these. We had a store building with the garage attached to it beside our house. Due to customers for cabins at all hours of the night, Alda and I had a bed in the back room of the store. I handled groceries for the convenience of the customers, and I also bought 2 very nice 8-foot glass cases in which I displayed the largest of our Indian relics. All the arrowheads and other small relics I mounted on 42 frames under dust-proof glass. These were displayed on the walls. Also the old gun night and drove on. That fall of 1938, a gentleman by the name of Howard Bratt from Bennett, Nebraska, stopped in. He was a rock hound and showed me some agates he had polished. I had often wanted to polish agates, as I had found them years before in Iowa. He got my interest all riled up, so I took him out to some gravel pits to hunt for agates. We found a few, and during the afternoon he described his method of polishing them. His was the old method used in Germany from a way back. After Howard Bratt left, I got busy and built a mud saw to saw rocks. That turned out to be one of the dirtiest messes one could ask for, and it took forever and a day to cut a 2-inch stone in 2. Along about this time, a Mr. Reisinger from Huron, South Dakota, heard of my Indian relics collection and came to see it, as he also go to Badlands where agates were very plentiful. He said, a week or 2 later, Jimmy and I drove to Huron, South Dakota, and picked him up and headed for those agates, which turned out to be chert. At the time, I didn't know the difference. They were very pretty so on the surface, so we took home about a bushel. As I got more experience, I gradually threw them out as no good for my purpose. While I was on that trip, we were in scenic South Dakota, and there we met a very fine old-timer, Tom Freet. He also cut and polished stones. He had a diamond saw for cutting and demonstrated it for Jimmy and I. That was the death of my mud saw. I told Jimmy when we got home I'd throw the mud saw on the dump heap. And I did just that before I greeted any of the family. It took me 2 or 3 to get the diamond saw in running order, and the first night I stayed up all night sawing agates and of course, a lot of worthless rock. Every man and woman in our cabins were up all night watching and just as excited as I was. That saw cut through a 2-inch rock in a couple of minutes. What a night was that. I bought a drive shaft, and in a week I had assembled 2 grinding wheels, a rock center, and a polishing wheel. All this was my own idea, and I have seen many expensive rock polishing equipment, but I will honestly say I never seen one that worked as well as mine. This first 12-inch saw cut more inches of rock than any saw I ever had. Saw cut more inches of rock than any saw I ever had. Things went well in a normal way in camp. Some of us went agate hunting when we had time, and also made trips to Glendive, Montana, to hunt moss agates along the Yellowstone River. We got some real nice ones. I started making ring sets and bought blank sterling mountings for rings and mounted them. On April the 1st, 1940, our entire family again got together in Chicago to celebrate Father and Mother's 60th wedding anniversary. It was wonderful, and everyone was happy, but that was to be our last, as Father passed away 10 days before the 61st. After Father died, I purchased some of the furniture, Mother furniture, than she had. Her home now was within a few feet of our home, where we could look after her, and Alda went to see her several times a day. I did too, and one of the boys stayed with her every night. All this time I was working and learning more about the rock polishing business. Jimmy had worked for a few months for a Mr. Hoare at Levin, South Dakota, in his rock shop. Jimmy had cast some sterling rings, so when he came home, I purchased a casting outfit and went at it. It actually took a month tinkering at it before I cast the first perfect ring. From then on, I had but little trouble. I took up silversmithing with no instructions and fabricated many types of jewelry and started selling retail and wholesale and built up a real business. Jimmy worked for me cutting, polishing stones and fabricated many types of jewelry and started selling retail and wholesale and built up a real business. Jimmy worked for me cutting, polishing stones. I made many mistakes getting going, but it all came out in the wash. Uncle Sam was busy getting an army together, so Jimmy tried to enlist 2 different times and rejected. Then was drafted and was placed in 4F. Bob tried to enlist twice, but was rejected due to his arthritis, which had him quite crippled. Don joined the Air Corps and went into training and was not released until the war was ended. In 1962 to 65 were exciting years, some sad and some pleasant. Jimmy was married to Dorothy Muncie, May the 14th, 1943. The war was ended. In 1962 to 65 were exciting years, some sad and some pleasant. Jimmy was married to Dorothy Muncie, May the 14th, 1943. Alda's father passed away December the 13th, 1943. Don met Marion Reeves while in service, and they were married October the 16th, 1944. So the family was becoming separated. These years during the war, business was very slow in the tourist trade, as it was quite quiet in camp, but I worked long days making jewelry. Bob was home from where he had been working in Minneapolis. He and I took about 500 men's rings I had made up and headed for Montana on a sales trip and agate collecting trip. Sales went very good, and we collected a nice supply of moss agates. Bob was quite crippled from arthritis. And the doctors advised him to go to Arizona for his health. So on January the 11th, 1945, I went with him to help him, as there were mornings he could hardly get out of bed. He drove his car. I sold jewelry along the way wholesale and disposed of practically all I had. Jimmy was working for me and living in Grandma's house, as she had built an addition to Sister Gladys's house in Moreland, Minnesota, and started to live there. That way Alda and I were not tied down. So we bought a 26-foot trailer house and loaded up my jewelry making equipment in it, and in the fall of 1945 we left for Tucson, Arizona. Arriving October the 4th, we spent the winter there, and we rushed her to the hospital where she had an appendix removed. She recovered fast and enjoyed the winter. Bob was working in the El Conquistador Hotel, so we've seen him often. That winter really turned out jewelry for our trip in the spring, and it sold good. I also sold quite a little in the desert village where we were staying. All during the winter I was receiving shipments of cut stones to mount in jewelry from Jimmy. Also a Hazel family lived in our house that winter, and she and Earl worked some for me, also helping Jimmy. This desert country was very interesting to all of us, so when Bob wasn't working, we all rode out in the desert, and we covered a great many miles with the car and on foot too, looking for Indian relics and mineral specimens we were finding around the old mines and their dumps. There were many places to collect, and we done a lot of it. I might add right here, we had been collecting some mineral specimens in Minnesota. Also, on one of our visits to our relation in Chicago, we had collected around the old lead mines in Wisconsin and near Galena, Illinois. So by now I had quite an assortment. I turned the garage that was attached to our store into a mineral room. I purchased 2 fluorescent mineral lamps and had a beautiful display of colors that were out of this world. From this winter on, we have spent every winter in Arizona and the summers in Little Falls, Minnesota, up till 1951 when we sold our tourist court and moved to Arizona. We're out of this world. From this winter on, we have spent every winter in Arizona and the summers in Little Falls, Minnesota, up till 1951 when we sold our tourist court and moved to Arizona for good. My mother passed away June the 2nd, 1951, after she had visited us in Tucson the winter before for several months. She was visiting Sister Gladys in Denver and was taken to the hospital with pneumonia and developed cerebral hemorrhage, which took her from us. Alda's mother died in 1934. I'll back up a little. Between 1945 and 51, we traveled back and forth and often between Arizona and Minnesota, and often took different roads, though through different states, and looked for good cutting stones. This is my best seller. Hazel had been in extremely poor health for a number of years and suffered a great deal. I sent her to Rochester to Mayo's Clinic, but they sent her home in no encouragement. They lived in our camp, and she helped Alda clean the cabins the best she could, for which we paid her. She and Earl thought Arizona would be good for her, so moved out here in 1948. However, she improved very little, but she wouldn't give up and ran a fruit stand for 2 or 3 years to help make a living, but her trouble developed into cancer, and on October the 8th, 1959, she passed away. Bob married Audrey Ellis, a widow with a little boy and girl, on December the 24th, 1949. He built a very fine house at 4463 North Pomona Road. We all had wonderful times in the desert and mountains. Jim and Dorothy and Gary and Janet, and they sure had fun on these outings. I think I failed to mention all the grandchildren, the names. There was Audrey's two, Luther and Janie. By 1954, Don and Marion had three girls, Denise, Anita, and Donna. They also lost Grant, a little boy 6 months old. Hazel and Earl's children were Perry, Richard, or Dick, and Peggy. Back I go again to Minnesota. It was in the fall of 1938, Jimmy, Charlie Plumsky, and I went up above Hill City, Minnesota on a deer hunt near Blue Lake. This is another time we could not stand it in the tent, so we pulled stakes and set our tent up in an empty ice house. There we were well protected from the wind and cold and got along fine. There was once Jimmy was real warm. It was when three innocent little doe deer came upon him when he was answering one of the calls of nature. It so shocked the dear little girls, so they ran away. Jimmy proceeded to run them down. Well, that really frightened the deer, so they outran him. But Charlie and I could never understand how they did it, for Jimmy had stepped nearly 15 feet in places going downhill. They must have outrun him on going uphill. Anyway, he came in all lathered and hot from running. Happened to be the lucky guy again, as I was standing on a stump along an old logging road. I couldn't see 10 feet in the brush, as every bush and limb was covered with hoarfrost. I was hoping a deer would come out in the road. All at once I heard a limb snap, and then a doe head raised up a little over the bushes. I made the top of her head open up like a coffee pot, and she was mine. So now I'll start another little rhyme, as I have been idle for quite a long time. It looked like killing deer was out of style. I hadn't killed one in such a long while. I'm at it again, so from me you will hear, for I've just bagged my number 13 deer. From the time I was about 16, I was troubled with back trouble, and it got so bad that for I've just bagged my number 13 deer. From the time I was about 16, I was troubled with back trouble, and it got so bad that in 1949 I went to Rochester to Mayo Clinic, and after several weeks the doctor told me, due to my age and arthritis in my spine, they were unable to do anything for me. And he said for me to hang to my canes, which I was using too. And he said to Alda, as she was with me, from here on out you will have to take care of him. I got so mad on the way driving home when I got to thinking how they would check me. Mostly young interns that started doctoring, and about all they could do was twiddle their fingers and refer me to. I wrote Brother Jim telling of my experience at Rochester. He wrote back and telling me of an orthopedic doctor, Mr. Jinks, in Minneapolis. I got in touch with him, and he said he couldn't make a young man out of me, but he could cure my pain. He performed surgery and 28 days in the hospital, and 7 weeks in body cast, and then in a steel brace for 7 months. I was cured and had no more pain. I had no more trouble until 1951, when I was working on a brick wall around our trailer court. I again hurt my back and have been troublesome ever since. In looking in our photo album, it helps me to my mind a lot. In 1942, Jimmy, I'm mistaken, it was at Philip Webster's place. It was dry and noisy as there was no snow. We had been hunting some time with no luck. So Jimmy and Bob took off through the timber to the left, and I proceeded to step quietly down an old logging road. I didn't go far until I saw several deer running through some second-growth oak 30 rods away. I cut loose on them, emptying my gun. Jim and Bob came on the run, and we went to see the results. We found a deer at once, but looked very hard to find more. We finally found a blood trail, and after a walk of a few rods, we found another doe. We drug this doe back where the other was, but I wasn't satisfied, as I was sure. Drug this doe back where the other was, but I wasn't satisfied, as I was sure I hit another. Just then another hunter came along, and the four of us searched for 15 minutes though there was blood everywhere. We found no more deer. A week later, this gentleman came to my place and told me he had accidentally run across my other deer right where we had been looking. The trouble was the oak leaves were the same color as the deer, and one could walk within a few feet of her without seeing her. And he said she was spoiled when found. 4 deer loped through the brush in fright, and I started looking through my gun sight. I shot 2 times and dropped a big doe, which made number 14 deer, you know. Then shooting 3 more times real straight, I sealed 2 more deer's awful fate. One I won't count. She wasn't found, though we tried. The others we took home to be boiled and fried. I think I done well, as my boys had seen, as that last deer was number 15. In 1943, Brother Jim wrote me he was taking a number of his customers and friends on an elk hunt, and I was invited. So the call of the wild was too much for me to resist, so I took the train to Billings, Montana, and the bus from there to Cody, Wyoming. There was quite a few of us, and we went by car to Pahaska Teepee, a place built by Buffalo Bill years before. From there, all our camp supplies and duffel was actually just about wrecked myself, at least the lower extremities. When I walked, my legs formed a beautiful loop, and when I sat down, I didn't, for 2 days. I also discovered I was getting old. I had to lead my horse to a log in order to mount him, but getting off was easy. I just fell off. This hunt sure was enjoyed by all, and everyone got some game. The first day out, I was pussyfooting down the mountainside like a Cheyenne Indian when 2 spring fawns shot across in front of me. I sprung to action and dropped both of them. So now the camp would get its first taste of wild game. On the mountainside up in the pines, I raised my trusty rifle in a fraction of time, and just 17. 2 days later, Bill Kent, my guide, and I were returning to camp in the evening when we heard a bull elk bugle. Bill gave a pretty good imitation of the old boy, so the elk showed up in a clearing up the mountainside. It was a long shot, and my first knocked off an antler, but the second brought him down. It was the first elk I had ever seen wild. busy trying to plant a crop and busy trying to plant a crop and on the few acres we had under cultivation. In the fall we cut many tons of hay with a scythe, as we had very little land that could be mowed with a horse mower. Our place was like a lot of Minnesota. It had been logged over many years before by several different logging companies, and when they cut a tree a couple of feet in diameter and it had a small hole in the butt end of it, they just left it and cut another tree. So when the settlers arrived many years later, to settle the country, these trees had become so rotten that they were free. So when the settlers arrived many years later, to settle the country, these trees had become so rotten that they were piled and burned, which was an awful job considering it had to be done by manpower, as in those days we had no machine to help us. The same applied to pulling the stumps. We did dynamite the stumps, but still it required a lot of work digging around the roots so the horses could pull them. Every acre of land that was cleared took a lot out of us. In the early spring of 1906, work became slack in the tailor trade, so Ray came home for a while. He brought along a 303 Savage rifle a friend wanted to sell, so I bought it from Ray for $10. Later Ray nicknamed me Sleepy Eye Deer Slayer. That winter of 1905 and 1906 was a very heavy snow winter, and there was lots of deer. Though I was attending school about every Saturday, Ray, Dad, and I would go hunting. Father would post on his stump near a deer trail, and Ray and I made a big circle and drive toward him. On every occasion when I came through, I'd find Ray on his stump too. So I got suspicious, and on the next drive, as soon as I got out of sight, I watched, and sure enough, Ray headed for his stump to wait for deer. I was very upset to think Father and Ray would use me for a dog and complain to Mother. The following Saturday, Father said I had to cut wood, but Mother came to my rescue and said I was going hunting on spirits and covered several miles in the snow and was on the old Hog's Back, a range of hills south of our place, about 4 p.m. I was beginning to wonder where I was going to spend this cold winter night, because I was determined not to return home skunk for Ray to laugh at. I was stealing along like a Blackfoot Indian when, on looking down the hillside about 25 rods, I saw a lady deer looking my way. I raised my deer killer and took careful aim at the neck of this doe. It may sound like a shame, but at the crack of my rifle, I was admitted into the order of big game hunters that I readily knew, and I felt quite proud, for I was only 15, and I had bagged my first deer as my aim had been clean. Up to now, Ray had killed 2 deer, and Father had got 1, so we were well supplied with meat for the winter. When I arrived at the warm deer hut, I had wrapped in a clean handkerchief. In the winter, I trapped for white weasel and muskrats, and I had good success. The weasel hides averaged about $1 a piece, the muskrats around 25 cents. I had a skunk runner into one of my traps now and then, and the folks wished I'd give up this trapping business. One day in the fall, I was making a winter set for mink, but got careless and the trap went off and caught my hand. I reset it very carefully, but one foot slipped into the creek and my thumb in the trap. That was too much. I reset the trap and grabbed a bunch of leaves and threw it on it, but didn't expect to catch anything. But next morning I had an 18-pound coon, and the only one I ever heard of in that country in the early days. But didn't expect to catch anything. But next morning I had an 18-pound coon, and the only one I ever heard of in that country in the early days. I only attended school about 2 months during the winter, for when spring work came on, I had farm work to do, so I never finished the 7th grade. The folks paid Letty's room and board in Ogilvy, and she was able to finish high school. Afterwards, she taught 1 term of school in North Dakota. Otherwise, when she was home, she done considerable visiting among her girlfriends. I was kept quite busy, but occasionally I went to join to Ann Lake fishing, and now and then hunting, killing lots of young rabbits in the spring that were fine eating. On November the 8th, 1906, Barney Godola came from town, but Old Deer Killer was good at long range. So at the age of 16, with several long shots, deer number 2 before my rifle did drop. On the 2nd day of July in 1906, my cousin Louis Clay and I were after a load of wood when I spied a big doe, and so again I got rough and got her with a single shot. The 3rd deer before my rifle fell while I was still 16, so I'd done quite well. We celebrated the 4th of July, inviting up many neighbors to our place, and we had a real deer feast. That fall I camped in a vacant house at Ann Lake and trapped for muskrats and white weasel, and had very good success. I also set a trap for a coyote. They are pretty smart animals and extremely hard to get in a trap. But this one wasn't very well educated, so he blundered in to set a trap for a coyote. They are pretty smart animals and extremely hard to get in a trap. But this one wasn't very well educated, so he blundered into my trap. I received $7.50 bounty for it. I only was a couple of weeks at Ann Lake, but I sure enjoyed that kind of a life. In January 1908, I was on my way when I heard a dog barking real savage, like down not far away. I ran to the house and got my rifle and hurried to the dog. He had a big doe at bay. I took 4 shots, for some I missed, but number 4 deer went down on my list. In the following March, I did another 1-shot stunt, killing another doe in almost the same place. I took 4 shots, for some I missed, but number 4 deer went down on my list. In the following March, I did another 1-shot stunt, killing another doe in almost the same place. I got my first deer. I dressed her out and started for home to get the team and sled, but when I was about 40 rods away, I looked back, and our neighbors Schultz and son Bill were dragging my deer the other way. I felt like shooting them, but knew that wouldn't do. I was really mad, but could do nothing about it, as it was out of deer season. The worst part of it was we had given them a half of a deer we had killed in a quarter of another. That's gratitude. Old Sleepy Eye Deer Slayer, as Ray had nicknamed me, filed another notch on his gun, for this is number 5, you see. We had an agreement with our neighbor. Schultz that when he went to town, he would bring our mail, and we would do the same for him. This was in 1906. He had gone to town, so I went over to his place to see if he had returned home. His 2 boys, Henry 16, my age, and Charlie 14, were fooling around as Mr. Schultz had not got home yet. They suggested we go down by the river just back of their barn. The day before, an old boat had floated down the river, and they had tied it up. We went to the river, and there had been a dam there many years before, but washed away now. But below the dam was a very deep place caused by the logs going through the dam many years before. As we got there, we stood and began to sink. I stepped out and swam only a rod to the shore, and then when I was on the bank, I looked back, and they were drowning. They had told me before they could swim. I jumped back in, and how? I will never know, but I got Charlie to the shore, but Henry drowned. I went for help and saw Mr. Henchy with a load of lumber. I called him, and he came, but couldn't swim, and I was a poor swimmer and exhausted, so I went home and a half mile and told my folks. Father went to his shop and made a grapple hook and attached a rope. By the time we got back, several of the neighbors had arrived, and Mr. Wilson started throwing the hook and dragging it, and finally caught on one of Henry's shoes and pulled him out. He said he would kill the whole family. After he sobered up, he came and apologized, but the next time he got drunk, he went crazy again. On one occasion, he came to our place drunk with his old shotgun, and Mother had quite a time quieting him down. He didn't know it, but I had my rifle on him all the time, and if he had raised that gun to shoot anyone, he would never have made it. From then on, we were not on friendly terms. A few years later, he died quite suddenly, but there were no tears shed. Even his family were glad he was dead. He beat his wife and children every time he went on a drunk. In the spring of 1908, I went to Tower City, North Dakota, to work for my Uncle Charlie, Father's brother. But I didn't like the prairie country, and in the couple of months, I went to Miles City, Montana, to work for my Uncle Charlie, Father's brother. But I didn't like the prairie country, and in the couple of months, I went to Miles City, Montana, as my brother Ray had a tailor shop there. I got a job on a ranch at $35 per month and worked there until fall, when I went home and helped Father harvest his crop and put up hay. I spent the winter at home. While at the ranch, I killed my first rattlesnake. I didn't see it, but the boy I was with did, and yelled rattler. I went into the air, so when the rattler struck, he found I wasn't there. In 1906, I took a contract to cut 10 cords of wood for a country school about 3 miles north of our home. I had to walk 2.5 miles each way, taking a lunch, axe, and saw. Cord. To this day, every time I think of it and see someone using a chainsaw, I feel like crying. Why didn't they have chainsaws when I was a kid? In the spring of 1909, I again went west, this time to Glendive, Montana, where I worked on a government reclamation job on the Yellowstone River. After some time there, I went to Cody, Wyoming to visit Brother Jim, Margaret, and baby Lyle. Jim was living on a ranch 20 miles up the North Fork of the Shoshone River from Cody, working for Clyde Huffman, who had 2 ranches. Jim was at the upper ranch, but was working at the lower ranch 4 miles from home and came home every other night. I stayed with baby and Margaret. I spent most of my time on a bench land just above the house looking in Margaret. I spent most of my time on a bench land just above the house looking for arrowheads, as the Indians had camped there many years before. In this particular day, I took sick very suddenly and came to the house very weak and pale. Margaret was scared and said if I'd get the horse saddled, she would ride to Murray Smith's and a mile and phone Jim. I said I'd go, as Lyle was teething and was very cross. She didn't think I could but help me on the horse. I let the horse lope all the way and had 2 wire gates to open. Truly, I never remembered of ever opening them, but somehow I did and left them open. I rode in Smith's yard and called the lady. She asking her to phone Jim, telling him I was sick. Jim telling him I was sick. I returned home and fell off the horse in front of the door. Margaret dragged me in the house, and it wasn't long before Jim arrived. About the same time, a friend, Fred Morris, arrived. They talked it over and knew I wouldn't last until the doctor could arrive. Fred said he thought it was mountain fever, and if so, black sage tea was good for it. So away they went, and in a few minutes we're back with some sage and made some of the bitterest tea that anyone could ever drink. They got a few swallows down me, and in a few minutes, about half a cup. I started vomiting and up green slime, and that looked like slime on an old horse trough. In the short time I had so recovered up by night, and the next day, though I was weak, I was back after relics. On the 10th day of June, I joined the Wyoming Militia, 3rd Regiment, Company E, and was shipped to Basin, Wyoming, Bighorn County seat. There were 9 of us, and we were sent there to guard the county jail. It was the days of the sheep and cattle wars in the West, and they had cattlemen in jail for killing sheepmen. The cattle ranchers had threatened to free the prisoners, and the sheepmen threatened to kill the prisoners in jail. That was why we were sent to guard the jail. There were 5 men in jail. We spent 6 months and 10. The cattle ranchers had threatened to free the prisoners, and the sheepmen threatened to kill the prisoners in jail. That was why we were sent to guard the jail. There were 5 men in jail. We spent 6 months and 10 days there until after the trial. We experienced no trouble. 1 man received a death sentence, but later his sentence was reduced to life in prison. 2 men got 20-year prison terms, and 2 others received 3 to 5 years, as they had only burned sheep herder wagons. Mother was in very poor health, so when the Army released me, I returned home and worked with Father for the balance of this year. In the spring of 1910, I went to work for Mr. Ockerkirk, a German Methodist preacher. He was batching on his farm, as his family were living in Ogilvy, where breakfast from 7 to 8, dinner from 12 to 2, and supper from 6 to 8. The meals were good, and we got along good, but I couldn't get used to this life from 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. day after day. While I was working there was a dance in town 6 miles away. I wanted to go, although I didn't dance much, as I didn't care for dancing, but liked to be with the crowd. And really I was liked by the girls, as I didn't do any drinking, so on many occasions a girl wouldn't want to go home with a boy friend that after he had been drinking. I got the job of taking the girl home often and enjoyed it. I had followed a walking plow all day, then walked 6 miles each way, and again plowed all day without labor to work. Mr. Henderson and family. They were nice people, and I liked working for them, but every now and then when the wind was from the south, I'd hear a train whistle blow. So after 2 months, I decided to quit and move on. This rambling had got into my bones, I guess. Mrs. Henderson said a rolling stone gathered no moss. I didn't want to get moss covered. Then I said, setting a hen gathers no fat, and laughed and moved on. I had a notion for some time I'd like to go back to Farmerville, Iowa, where I was born and raised. This was 1910 and early fall, so I went back and worked for a friend with a threshing crew around to the different farms, and After thrashing was finished, I plowed his friend's fields. When finished, arms, and after thrashing was finished, I plowed his friend's fields. When finished, I went to work for Charlie Cole, a neighbor, plowing his fields for him. He gave me a full noon hour, so to while away the time, I'd take my .22 rifle and go practice on sparrows or throw a can in the air and shoot at it. I bought shells 500 at a time from Sears Roebuck. By the time I had used up 500 shells, I had got to where I could hit a can quite often. I ordered more shells, and that fall I got to where I could throw up 16 pieces of hard coal, one at a time, and hit at least 15, and now and then I could hit all. I also got to where I could hit a can 3 times before it hit the ground. These are facts, and I am sure my family can verify this, as they saw me hit cans like this many times. After plowing was done, I picked corn for the first time, and it came easy for me, and I averaged over 100 bushels a day, which was better than many old-timers did. From Cole's place, I went to Frank Roach's to pick corn. After it was finished, I came back home to Minnesota. I had a wonderful time that fall among old schoolmates and friends. On January the 1st, 1911, Mother invited several of the younger neighbors to a party she was giving Letty and I. 3 young Swedes came to the party half drunk. That didn't go with Ma at all. One was so drunk we laid him on my bed. Mother demanded the other 2 to give up their bottle, but they refused, so she ordered them to leave. He sure took care of them. They were not hurt and left. But their sisters had to go in order to get home, so it ruined the party. I had quite a laugh at Mother because she always thought parties were fine, as the young people were much nicer than those that attended dances. The following day we had another party, January the 2nd, 1911. This bunch was Letty's and my friends from town and a nice crowd. In the afternoon I asked Mother who all she had invited. She named several and finally came to the name Alda Benson. I asked her who she was, and Mother said she was the new folks that moved into the old Campbell place. I asked how old is she. Mother said 15. I was just gushed. That evening when Morris and Mary drove in our yard two Gibsons, they had Alda with them. I helped the girls out of the sled and was introduced to her, and as they walked towards the house, I turned to Morris and said, "Have you got a claim on that girl?" Morris replied, "No." I said, "I'm going to marry that girl," and truly I meant it. After we became engaged in July, Alda said she had the same thought in her mind to marry me. Alda was attending school in Ogilvy, and so was Letty. So on a couple of occasions, she came home and spent the night with Letty, so we became better acquainted, and I walked her home from school a time or 2. On February the 2nd, I left for Uncle Charlie's place to work again. Of course, we became better acquainted, and I walked her home from school a time or 2. On February the 2nd, I left for Uncle Charlie's place to work again. Of course, we kept Uncle Sam in business as we wrote letters and cards every day to one another. On the 1st of July, I took time off from work and returned to Minnesota to see my girl. We spent 2 happy weeks as we were together a lot, and we became engaged while I was home. I returned to Uncle Charlie's in the middle of July, and the letter writing continued right on, but I also got poetic, so I wrote my first poem, which of course it was to Alda. My dear little girl, I'm going to write a thought that's in my heart. For really and truly I'm in love for you. For, of course, it was to Alta. My dear little girl, I'm going to write a thought that's in my heart. For really and truly I'm in love for you. For I believe thou art the best little girl alive, and I would sure like it fine if you would get stuck on me and promise to be mine. If ever a tough should come along and try to hurt your little girl, I'd hit him so awful hard that he would buzz and whirl. And if ever some old rich fellow would try to get you for his, I'd climb his frame and beat him up. Jing, how I'd fight, bing whiz. If you'd fall in some lake when I was lurking around, I'd jump right in and get you out, for I wouldn't let you drown. For you, my dear, I'd take and fight grasshoppers and seagulls. With love and kisses, I am yours forever, Perry Nichols. That fall I came home and helped Father dig and out his potato crop and other farm work. Alice celebrated her. We had marriage in mind, so talked it over with her parents, and they gave their consent. So on the 6th day of November 1911, Letty, her Alda's parents, Alda and I went by wagon to Moore, Minnesota, where we were married by the minister, Reverend Feathers. Alda's parents wanted us to live with them, so I made a deal with Dad Benson. I was to work 2 days for him, and he was to work 1 day with me with team. The year before, I had purchased a small farm on the south shore of Van Lake. After a short time, Alda and I decided it would be better if we moved to our place, so I fixed up the house a little and better and built on a kitchen to it, and we moved on the farm. I bought an old horse from Joe Gruber's father for 2 or 3 seconds before putting it down. At times it was very nerve-wracking to drive him. Of course, the horse wasn't to blame. When he would step over a smallest thing, he went one leg and then another until I began to think if I put a saddle on him, he would get his feet caught in the stirrups and ride himself around. Poor old Sam, as that was his name, was subject to the colic and would lay down and groan. I'd go to the house and put 2 or 3 tablespoonfuls of soda in a bottle, a beer bottle, and fill it with warm water. When he would see me coming, he would raise his head and open his mouth, and I would pour down the soda water, and in 3 minutes, old Sam was well again. I had a one-horse cultivator, and he wobbled so when he was tramping down a lot of corn. So Alda used to ride him while I cultivated. It sure was a big help. Such was our early life. I trapped in winter so we could get a little money, and in early fall, before the lake froze over, Alda and I would take our boat and go out among the muskrat houses. When we would see a muskrat swimming, I'd shoot it with my .22 rifle. After the lake froze, I'd skate up to the house and jump on it, and if a rat swam out, I could see him just under the ice and would shoot the ice above him, and the ice hit him and killed him. This way the skin was never damaged. Later, when the ice was covered with snow, I cut holes in the house and set traps. This way the skin was never damaged. Later, when the ice was covered with snow, I cut holes in the house and set traps in them and caught the rats. I was overseer on the road one summer as different farmers worked out their poll tax. There was plenty of good times, as the neighbors all knew one another and were willing to lend a helping hand any time. And we visited back and forth. On September the 3rd, 1912, our daughter Hazel Alda was born. So now there were 3. We lived on this farm until 1914, when I sold and bought a 40-acre farm 4 miles southeast of Aiken, Minnesota, in Aiken County. We moved by railroad car on his hay meadow nearly every night, so several of us neighbors went to the meadow a little early, and sure enough, the buck showed up. I was the lucky guy. I got him with one shot. So we all eat again. And as the sun sank from sight, this noble buck deer came to help old Sleepy-eyed Deer Slayer win his way to hunting fame. And with one well-directed shot, old Sleepy-eye turned the trick, and the mighty buck went down on his list, deer number 6. I cut and sold some cordwood in winter, also trapped for muskrats and weasels. When spring came and the ice was out of the river, we boys had great fun, fished with hook and line with good success, and sold the fish. Shipped by express to St. Paul, Minnesota, pickerel brought 2 cents, crappies and sunfish 12 cents, and perch 7 cents. All were dressed. Between us, we made fair wages and had a barrel of fun doing it. We enjoyed our life there and had wonderful neighbors, but in the summer of 1916, we received a letter from Dad Benson saying he had contracted to haul all the gravel for the town of Ogilvy for the purpose of putting in concrete walks all over town, and was wondering if I'd come and help him. So we rented our place to a neighbor, Earl McKay, on shares, and we moved back to Ogilvy, where we were busy all summer, but the winter months were very slack and not much work. In the fall, Dad Benson very close for town and was wondering if I'd come and help him. So we rented our place to a neighbor, Earl McKay, on shares, and we moved back to Ogilvy, where we were busy all summer, but the winter months were very slack and not much work. In the fall, Dad Benson very close. Lloyd Perkins and I drove up to Aiken County, where I had killed deer, and our hunt was a big success. Dad killed a big buck. I got a small buck, and Lloyd got 2 yearlings, which he gave one to Blair, and we all went home happy. This was the 9th deer, and I see I have run ahead of myself, which I'll try to straighten out. So it's time again for this little rhyme. I just got another deer, and this was number 9. It was in the fall of 1914 that George to straighten out. So it's time again for this little rhyme. I just got another deer, and this was number 9. It was in the fall of 1914 that George Klingenhofer, Emerson Kay, and I drove about 15 miles southeast to Swamp Lake District for deer. This turned out to be the most miserable 3 days of my life. What we went through is almost unbelievable. It turned very cold, way below freezing, and the house we were going to, we couldn't get to it as a bridge had washed out. We backtracked a couple of miles and went into a county machine shed that sat on rocks about 6 inches off the ground. It was getting dark, so we put 2 blankets on each horse, then gave them a grain and hay. We the next day but found not a fresh track, as all the deer had headed into the spruce groves to get out of the wind and cold. There was an empty house nearby, so that night we tried sleeping on the bare floor. We had that day found that what we think was the bottom of a smokestack. It was a 1/4-inch thick iron, about 8 feet in diameter and 4 feet high. The top was like a funnel, upside down, with a 2-foot hole in it. We found an old wash boiler that we converted into a wood stove, and some tin roofing. We made a stovepipe. These we put in the center, and our iron house, we put planks on blocks of wood for seats, half froze. We set up all the rest of the night, and when it began to break day, we went for Emerson, and none too soon. We leaned the blankets up against the wall as they were froze stiff from us breathing under them. We tried to awaken Emerson, but he was near unconscious. It took a full hour to get him and his blood and circulation proper. We beat him and rolled him around real rough, but if we hadn't, he would never come to. We hadn't taken much food with us, as we expected we would get a deer the first day. We had bread, but it was frozen. We carried it around in our pockets and would try to scrape off a little with our teeth, but then we got only doe. I went looking for a rabbit and shot one. We carried it around in our pockets and would try to scrape off a little with our teeth, but then we got only doe. I went looking for a rabbit and shot one. When I got to it, it was covered with sores. I had killed a skunk the day before and wasn't too careful skinning it out, but I was hungry and my stomach was nearly killing me, as I had lots of stomach trouble as I had ulcers. I went and chopped off the two hindquarters and went to our iron house to cook them. When they started warming up, you could imagine the blue smoke was coming from them, and oh, so stout a smell. Emerson took off, but George and I each ate a leg, and believe me, it was good, but I had a bad breath for a day or two. Well, we hitched up and headed for home. In the fall of 1915, George and his brother Al, Emerson and I again hit that country. The next morning, George and I were hiking to a place to post as Al and Emerson were going to drive to us. All at once I saw 5 deer that appeared to be a short distance away. I got in 5 shots and didn't score. And while reloading the rifle, the deer started to run toward us, but didn't seem to get any closer. It then dawned on me what I was seeing was an optical illusion or a mirage. So I raised my gun and a little higher and knocked down a buck, but he jumped right up and ran straight away with another deer with him. One little doe headed off to the left like she was sent and in a hurry to get there. I shot her, and George stepped off the distance. It was 45 rods. Yeah, the leaves were froze and very noisy. I finally got an open shot. Sleepy Eye had again cut loose up on the path of game, and even at a long-range shot, I got the deer just the same. So upon his old rusty gun, another notch was gained, for by careful aiming, his 7th deer was slain. So on this very same day, at the age of 25, I killed my 8th deer, so I'm as sure as I'm alive. George and Emerson had went a couple of days ahead of Al and I, and George had killed 2 deer, so that made 4, 1 for each, so we went home very happy. In the spring of 1917, I bought 4 milk cows, and we moved back to the farm. It took us 4 days as we were leading the cows behind our wagon load of household goods. We had to stop nearly early every evening to let the horses and cows graze along the road. The roads were awful in those days, either mud or dust, but we were living pioneer lives and were used to hard times. Back on the farm, the usual things happened. One morning I was heading for the barn and chores, and I saw our faithful cattle dog with his ears up looking west. I looked and I saw a doe deer crawl under our fence wire. I rushed in the house and grabbed my rifle down from over the door where it was always loaded. I said to Alton and Hazel, come quick and see me get a deer. It was none to my credit. I missed the first shot, but as she was disappearing over the little hill, me get a deer. It was none to my credit. I missed the first shot, but as she was disappearing over the little hill, I hit her. This happened on December the 14th, 1917. So we're sure to eat again. On this fine winter day, when everything was still, this little doe came strolling alongside of the hill. For fate had willed it so, as our family needed meat. So I killed my 10th deer. We called it a Christmas treat. Our first house when we moved to Aiken was a log house, and very cozy in winter. I built a hen house, 12 by 32 feet, which we divided into rooms, and we moved into it expecting to build a house later winter. I built a hen house, 12 by 32 feet, which we divided into rooms, and we moved into it expecting to build a house later, but that wasn't to be. It was comfortable, and we lived there for most of 3 years. In the summer, Father and Mother came to visit us in 1919, and were with us for quite some time. Brother Jim, Lucille, and Nina came for a visit. Jim and Margaret had separated, and he had married Grace Ingle. Nina was her daughter. Grace was killed in a car accident, and he was now married to Lucille and adopted Nina. I took Jim to the lake to fish. He was casting, but I told him he would not get a bass, as I had never caught one on a hook. He laughed and said I was crazy. Gave me some pointers on how to use it, as I had never done any casting. He converted me to the rod and reel, and that is the way I fished ever after. 2 days after Jim came, our son James Perry was born on July the 18th, 1919. Everybody got along fine, so it was one big happy family. Jim didn't think much of the farming and me killing off myself at hard work, and begged me to sell out and come to Chicago. He said work was plentiful. That fall we sold the farm and stock and machinery and moved to Chicago. Sometime before these happenings, I believe, it was 1918 that the Army started drafting. I was lucky and was put the sufferings of some of the soldiers went through. After we were settled in the new home in Chicago, I went to work for the Graham Paper Company on South Wabash Avenue. It was not too far from Lake Michigan and very windy and cold there. I was in the shipping department and worked inside. We got a sweat up, then would have to go out in the alley in the cold wind to load trucks of paper. I got pneumonia and was laid up 28 days, so never went back to work there, but started to work in the shipping department of the Messenger Paper Company. After 3 months, I was advanced to salesman, and for nearly 3 years, I pounded the pavement. Though there was a certain amount of excitement in it, I was never entirely satisfied. To entertain ourselves, we would make long trips on the streetcar or elevated railway. We went to Lincoln Park and Zoo, to Riverview Amusement Park. We took lunches and had outings on the shore of Lake Michigan, and I also made trips along the Des Plaines River on the farmland looking for Indian relics, which I did regardless wherever I lived in different states, as that was a real hobby of mine. After all these things, both Al and I wanted to get in the wide open spaces. Also during our life in Chicago, I had very bad stomach trouble and walked the streets for weeks at a time when I was so sick I could hardly stand. Finally, I wrote my parents, who still owned the farm in Minnesota, but had left it years before and leased it to different ones. At this time, it was unrented, so I made a deal with them, and Brother Jim helped finance me, and we moved to the farm at Ogilvy, Minnesota in March 1923. I forgot the most important thing that happened while we lived in Chicago, the birth of our son, second son, Robert George. Alda had the baby done very nicely, and we were very happy. Bob's birthday was the 11th day of January 1922. Brother Jim helped me many times when I was in need of help. In fact, everybody. He became very prosperous and helped many friends on worthy causes. The good book says God loves a cheerful giver, and I'm sure God loved him and helped him to prosper. Back on the old home farm where I spent my younger days, we stocked up the farm and really started to live in our old life. I had sold all my guns at our sale in Aiken, so being back in the game country, I had to get new ones. I was sorry I had sold old Deer Killer and wished I had kept it for a relic, for old memory's sakes. I purchased a 22 Remington rifle and a 35 Remington automatic rifle. 23 Hilmer Nyberg and our hired man and I went to the cheese factory at Ann Lake with several cans of milk. We tied the horses to a tree and went fishing for a little while, and after catching a few fish we came to shore and got in a wagon to come home. For some reason never understood, the reach of the wagon broke and dropped, releasing the hind wheels, leaving the wagon box just on the front bolster. I yelled for Hilmer to jump, and he did and was unhurt. I didn't get a chance to jump, but hung to the lines as the horses started to run. I was thrown out between the horses. Also the seat and one milk can came out with me. The seat was broke so that there wasn't a piece of wood more than a foot long, and the can was unrecognizable when it was all over. I drug on so that there wasn't a piece of wood more than a foot long, and the can was unrecognizable when it was all over. I drug under the wagon by the lines for over 100 yards and dared not let loose. The back of the end of the wagon box was dragging and would run over me. That 100 yards was really 1,000 miles to me. I had on a new blue denim jacket, a jacket that I had purchased the day before, and it was just a bunch of ribbons at the end. I ended up in the hospital for 5 days, then went home to rest up, but no work for a month. But such can't be on a farm, so I was soon doing some work, but that runaway was my undoing, for my health was much worse after that. Different friends asked me to write a poem about my runaway. Soon doing some work, but that runaway was my undoing, for my health was much worse after that. Different friends asked me to write a poem about my runaway, which I did, and it was published in our hometown paper. I've been asked to write a little poem about Hilmer Nyberg and my runaway, which we had one autumn day. So I'll try my luck if you'll excuse me if this poem don't sound right to thee. It happened in 1923. From the cheese factory we were coming back when I noticed the wagons didn't track and the tugs had lost all their slack and something dropped with a whack. It was the reach that did drop, then the way began to slop. Hilmer jumped and went kerflop, but I was still on the top. Then came my turn to take a drop. I landed by the horse's heels. I began to kick, run, and reel. They drug with the lines near the wheel. Though not scared, though I sure did feel I'd never eat another meal the way the hide off me did peel. Mighty poor ride, and wished something would change the tide before I lost all my hide. But by their will I did abide, until at last I could divide, and I continued to slide and slide. I drug along with hesitation, my mouth full of dirt and not vegetation, which I considered a poor ration, so I thought of my preservation. And not caring to leave this great nation, I was willing to stop at the first station and accept that as my destination without the slightest hesitation. But down the hill we went pell-mell, myself and horses, Tom and Nell. Right then that team I sure would sell for most anything I'm here to tell. Them I had a notion to expel, just then they turned and I fell to lay for just a little spell on Ann Lake shore like a seashell, listening to a little bell. The wagon box struck me in the back, while a wheel used my head for a track. At last the lines had gleaned their slack, the box flew off, that's a fact. One milk can was very compact, as the horses piled things in a stack, as they struck a phone pole all intact. My bones all fell slightly bent, and in my head there was a dent. A friend came up and o'er me bent, with tears and eyes away he went. Though I lay by a camper tent, where I lay I paid no rent, and for a cold drink I would have spent all my money to the last cent. The doctor finally came at last, and a verdict finally passed that to a hospital I must go fast. But I insisted not at half-mast, so they lifted me up off the grass, though I couldn't breathe, hardly breathe, only grasp. For my bones started to rasp, I was glad to get in the car at last. For me they couldn't drive too fast, and the cemetery I gladly passed, arriving at the hospital at last, and attempted a little repast. In my bed, Doc examined me. I was badly bruised as could be. 9 ribs tore loose from my spine. Ouch, by gee. One black eye so they couldn't see. But it took a team to put it on me. My limbs were skinned like a bark tree. Tendons tore loose, 2 or 3. Hilmer was more lucky than me and had a right to be full of glee, for he jumped over the whipple tree and left the excitement. On November the 21st, 1923, our third son, Donald Lee, was born. I was the midwife as the roads were blocked with snow drifts, that the doctor was an hour late in arriving, but said I handled the situation very well, and both the baby and Allie were doing fine. So again, we were very happy. In the fall of 1924, I received a letter from Brother Jim inviting me as a guest on a moose hunt into Ontario, Canada. Though my health had been failing me more and more for some time, especially after my runaway, nevertheless, I accepted with a joking reply from him that he would guarantee to kill or cure me on the trip. Father was visiting at our house, and I was to bring him along. So on October the 19th, 1924, kill or cure me on the trip. Father was visiting at our house, and I was to bring him along. So on October the 19th, 1924, Father and I drove my Ford to Duluth, Minnesota, where we met Jim, Dr. Malton, and Dr. Close from Chicago, and E.B. Perrine from St. Paul in his car. After spending the night at the Spaulding Hotel, we all motored to Grand Marais on a north shore of Lake Superior, where we again holed up for the night. The following morning we was real busy, buying provisions for 3 hunting trips, for we were going to live like kings. Also, Jim hired a Polish cook by the name of Adam and 2 Indian guides, Pete and Fred, and we were all headed for the Pigeon River, which was the boundary line between Canada and the United States. By the name of Adam and 2 Indian guides, Pete and Fred, and we were all headed for the Pigeon River, which was the boundary line between Canada and the United States. There, a man with a team was hired to transport our provisions and duffel up the Pigeon River, 6 miles, where there was a deserted logging camp. This was to be our home for the hunt. We took a day to fix up our new home, and the following morning, full of pep and high hopes, we all started on a moose hunt. Jim, the guide Fred, and I saw 3 moose down the valley half a mile through the field glasses from our mountain top. But we're out of range. Fred returned to camp 5 miles and brought grub and a small tent that the 3 of us spent the night in. On the wind side of our tent that was broke in the middle and was only held together by this bark. I wanted to move the tent, but Jim said that tree had stood 100 years and could stand another night. We rolled in but got very little sleep because I still thought about that tree every time the bark squeaked. Jim said if I woke up in the morning and found I wasn't dead, he supposed I'd be disappointed. This got us to laughing and like a bunch of schoolgirls, and every little while some one of us would bust out laughing, so that was how we spent the night. Well, as you know, the tree didn't fall, and we were merrily on our way. I killed a deer that day, the first camp meet, and before my careful aim, the little doe went to deer heaven. So I entered her on my list as deer killed number 11. The second doe took a lot of lead before they gave up, and as I went to cut her throat, she lunged to her feet, knocking me down, but another shot finished her. So by having so much lead pumped into her hide, my 12th deer just laid down, gave up her ghost, and died. On the 25th, Preen, the guide Fred, and I took food and camped out that night in real moose country. The next morning, Fred and Preen went one way and I went another. I always liked hunting alone. I came down the mountainside through an awful mass of tangled cedars that had blown down some years before. It was slow going as I didn't want to snap so much as a twig. Just as I got through, off to my right, I heard the worst racket one could imagine. A bull moose was heading up through this jungle, making branches and limbs break as easy as matchsticks. I got on a stump in nothing flat and started a string of bullets after him. I shot 5 times, then slipped in a new clip of shells, and as he went over the mountain, I got my last shot. I made as good a time as I could getting up there, and blood was everywhere. I started tracking by blood with my head down and walked up to within a rod of him, and he started to run. But a shot in the neck, he was mine. And my first moose had dropped up on the mountainside, where I put 9 bullets in this noble monarch's hide. He had done his very best and had made a good run, but with old sleepy-eyed deer slayer, the odds were 2 to 1. And as I stood a-gazing on this monarch so grand, I thought, old sleepy eye, we knew you would. This moose was real large and had an antler spread of 43 inches. A fine trophy, and I had the head mounted so my family and friends could see it. This hunt was a great success for all. Doc Close got a nice buck deer. Doc Maltman bagged a big bull moose. Jim a buck and a fine bull. Preen got a doe and a bull. And I got 2 doe deer and 1 bull moose. Father wasn't able to do mountain climbing due to his age, but he got lots of partridge around camp. So all had a most enjoyable time. On this trip, I saw prairie chicken, partridge, snowshoe rabbits, beaver, porcupine, squirrels, moose, and deer. The 2 guys wounded a bear, but it got away. The following is a poem: partridge, snowshoe rabbits, beaver, porcupine, squirrels, moose, and deer. The 2 guys wounded a bear, but it got away. The following is a poem that pretty well describes our hunt. Of all the hunting trips that I have ever had, it's one I took with Brother Jim and my dear old dad. One shot Doc Close was along, and Dr. Jimmy Maltman too. Also Jolly E.B. Perrine and Adam Smitowski to feed the crew. We had 2 Indian guides, their names were Pete and Fred, and we were out to shoot the bull until he was plumb dead. We motored up to Canada, as bull moose was our aim, and stopped in Ontario, for moose it had one fame. We crossed the Pigeon River where the Cascades fall, and found there a hunting shack, the very best of all. We took one day off to fix a cozy home, and then grabbed our rifles and started out to roam.